When two souls meet on screen, it started on a quiet morning in Los Angeles, when Keanu Reeves arrived early on the set of a film that would later change everything. The movie was called Speed. At that time, no one could predict it would become one of the most talked about action films in history, or that it would give birth to a connection so real. People still talk about it decades later. Sandra Bullock walked in with her usual bright smile, holding her coffee, her energy lighting up the entire room. Keanu looked at her for a second longer than usual. It was an attraction in the normal way. It was recognition, as if two old souls had found each other again in a new life. They had never met before, but something about her calm confidence matched his quiet intensity. The first scene they shot together wasn't romantic. It was filled with danger, noise, and chaos. But when the cameras rolled, everything around them disappeared. It was like time slowed down. The audience would later call it chemistry, but to those who were there, it felt like something deeper to people who truly saw each other for the first time. After the director yelled cut, Sandra laughed nervously. Keanu smiled, a rare, shy smile that reached his eyes. He said softly, "You make chaos look beautiful." She didn't reply, but her eyes said thank you. From that day, their connection was effortless, built on mutual respect and unspoken understanding. In the long hours between takes, they talked about life, books, and silence. Both had experienced loss in different ways. Both valued kindness more than fame, and both carried a quiet sadness behind their smiles. Maybe that's what made their connection so real. They didn't have to pretend for the camera. Their hearts already understood each other. The movie wrapped up months later, and the crew said goodbye. No grand gestures, no dramatic farewells. Keanu and Sandra shared one last scene together, sitting quietly, watching the sun set behind the studio. No one spoke, but it was a moment neither would ever forget. Years later, when asked about Keanu, Sandra said she couldn't explain why people felt their chemistry, it was just real. And Keanu, in his humble way, said, "She made me a better actor." What they shared wasn't just professional, it was spiritual. A friendship so pure that it felt like love in its truest form, even without a romance. It was the kind of connection that reminded the world that real chemistry isn't something you can act. It's something you feel, something that touches your soul and never really fades away. And though they would go their separate ways after Speed, the world wasn't done with their story yet. Destiny had plans for them, plans that would bring them back together when no one expected it. Asterisk, when destiny brings them back. Years passed after Speed became a worldwide success. Both Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went on to live their separate lives, taking different paths, starring in different films, and growing as people. Yet, every time their names were mentioned together, people felt something, an invisible thread that refused to break. Keanu became known for his calm strength and quiet kindness, while Sandra became Hollywood's sweetheart with her mix of humor and heart. Though they rarely met, neither forgot the energy they once shared. Sometimes, during interviews, their names would come up and each would smile softly, avoiding any dramatic words, but their eyes always gave away more than they said. One day, years later, Keanu received a script called The Lake House. When he opened it and saw Sandra Bullock's name attached, he paused for a long time. It was as if life itself was giving them another chance, not for romance, but for connection. A chance to explore what time and distance had left unfinished. When they met again on set, there was a moment of silence. She looked at him and laughed softly, saying, "You haven't changed." He smiled, replying, "Neither have you," but they both knew they had changed. The years had made them softer, wiser, and more careful with their hearts. The Lake House was a story about the people who lived in different times, but were connected by love letters. Strangely, that story reflected something real between them. Their friendship had survived distance and silence, like a letter waiting to be opened. As they filmed, that deep trust returned instantly. The crew noticed how easily they understood each other's pauses, gestures, and silences. It was like they didn't need to act, their emotions flowed naturally. During one emotional scene, Sandra's eyes filled with tears. The director called cut, but Keanu stayed beside her, quietly handing her a tissue. She looked up, smiling through the tears. "You always show up at the right time," she whispered. Keanu replied gently, "So do you." Off-screen, they shared long talks about life and loss. Keanu had faced heartbreak and grief that changed him forever. Sandra had gone through her own storms. They didn't need to speak much to understand each other's pain. It was the kind of empathy that only comes from experience. When the movie was released, audiences could feel it too. They said it wasn't just acting, it was real emotion, honesty, and unspoken love. Their chemistry wasn't just about looks or lines. It was about trust, presence, and the way they truly saw each other as human beings. But even after the film ended, they never crossed the line between friendship and romance. Perhaps they both knew that some bonds are too rare to be changed. Some connections are meant to stay pure, untouched, and timeless. Still, fans around the world began to wonder what if fate wasn't done with them yet. What if the universe had one more twist planned for the two souls who always found each other, even when time stood in their way? Asterisk the bond that never needed words. After the lake house, life moved on again. Keanu and Sandra returned to their separate worlds of films, red carpets, and quiet nights. But something had changed this time. Their bond had deepened, not in the way of romance, but in the quiet truth of friendship that never fades. In interviews, Sandra would laugh whenever someone mentioned Keanu's name. She once said, "I think about him every now and then, and I just smile. He's one of those people you can't forget." Her voice always carried warmth, as if she was speaking of someone who truly mattered. Keanu, on the other hand, rarely talked about his personal life, but when asked about Sandra, he smiled softly and said, "She's a wonderful person, very strong, very kind. Working with her is easy. It feels natural." The way he said the last word told everyone what they needed to know. It wasn't about fame or image. It was about genuine respect. Behind the cameras and headlines, their friendship continued quietly. Sometimes they sent messages through mutual friends. Once, Sandra shared a funny story about how Keanu had shown up at her door years ago holding flowers and champagne just because she once mentioned she'd never tried truffles. No interview, no promotion, just a small act of kindness that stayed in her heart forever. "He's just that kind of man," she said later, "thoughtful in ways people don't expect." And that was the truth about Keanu. While the world called him the internet's gentleman, Sandra had known long before anyone else. She'd seen it in his eyes, the same calm gentleness that never tried to impress, but always left an impression. Still, deep down, there were questions neither of them asked. What if they had met at a different time? What if life had given them one more chance to explore something more than friendship? But they never said those words aloud. Maybe they didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than love. One night, at an award show, they crossed paths again. The crowd cheered as cameras flashed, and yet, in that moment, the world around them disappeared. Sandra reached out, smiling. Keanu took her hand and whispered, "It's good to see you again." She replied, "It always is." And for a brief second, everything felt like it used to be. The laughter, the trust, the magic that no time could steal. That night, after the show, fans flooded the internet with photos of them together. People called it the reunion everyone wanted. But what people didn't see was the quiet message behind their smiles. A reminder that real connections never fade. Even when the world changes, both of them knew that fame fades, films end, and applause stops, but the rare bond between two souls who respect and understand each other never truly disappears. And though they would go back to their own lives again, that moment stayed with them like a silent promise that no matter where they went, they'd always carry a piece of each other's kindness within them. When the world remembers what they had, years passed again, and Hollywood moved fast as always. New stars rose, new stories filled the screens. But every time people spoke about real chemistry in movies, one name kept coming back: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. Fans still watched Speed and The Lake House as if they were made yesterday. New generations discovered them and asked the same question. How could the people make something feel so real without ever being a couple in real life? The truth was simple: they didn't act love, they lived it through kindness, respect, and understanding. Their connection wasn't built for cameras, it was built for the heart. Sandra was once asked in an interview if she'd ever had a crush on Keanu. She laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Of course I did," she said honestly, "but it was something pure. He was the kind of man you admire, not chase." Then she added softly, "He never knew." But the world didn't know that around the same time, Keanu had said something similar in another interview. When the host asked if he'd ever been interested in Sandra, he smiled and said quietly, "She didn't know." The audience laughed, but that moment broke the internet. People realized they had both felt something deep, but never told each other. Not because they were afraid, but because their friendship was too sacred to risk. As the clip went viral, millions shared it with captions like, "This is what real respect looks like," and "Soulmates in another lifetime." It reminded people that love doesn't always have to be romantic. Sometimes, The most beautiful form of love is the one that never demands anything in return. Around that time, Sandra faced a personal loss. She stayed away from the spotlight for a while. Quietly, Keanu sent her a letter, not a public message, not a post, just words from one friend to another. It wasn't filled with advice or pity. It simply said, "You're stronger than the pain, and you're not alone." Sandra later said that no meant more to her than 1,000 kind words from anyone else. Their connection had turned into something eternal, a quiet reminder that goodness never fades. Both continued living their lives, loving in their own ways, giving back to others. Keanu through his silent acts of generosity. Sandra through her warmth and humor. The world saw them as movie icons. But those who truly paid attention saw something greater, two souls teaching everyone that real love doesn't always end in marriage or a kiss. Sometimes it ends in peace. And yet, deep inside, destiny still wasn't finished with their story. Because when something is written in the stars, time and distance can only delay it, not erase it. The reunion that no one expected. It was a quiet winter evening when the news broke that Sandra Bullock would be receiving a special Lifetime Achievement Award. Her long career, filled with laughter, love, and unforgettable roles, was finally being honored. What she didn't know, however, was that someone very special had agreed to present that award. The night of the ceremony arrived. The hall was filled with bright lights, cameras, and applause. Sandra sat among friends, smiling gracefully, unaware of what was about to happen. The announcer's voice echoed through the room. To present this award, please welcome a dear friend, a man she once shared unforgettable moments with on and off screen. Keanu Reeves. The crowd gasped and then cheered wildly. Sandra's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't seen him in years. As Keanu walked on stage, dressed in his usual black suit, calm and humble, something shifted in the room. The energy changed. It felt like time itself had stopped. He looked at her, smiled gently, and began speaking. "There are people who leave a mark on cinema," he said softly. "And then there are people who leave a mark on hearts." Sandra Bullock did both. As he continued, his words weren't just lines, they were memories. He talked about their first days on the speed set, how she could make everyone laugh even on the hardest days, how her kindness was not a performance but a way of life. "She has a light," he said, "and even when life grows dark, she never lets it fade." The audience listened in silence. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. By the time Keanu said her name and handed her the award, there wasn't a single person who wasn't moved. She stood up, walked to the stage, and for a long second, they just looked at each other like old friends who had been through storms, and finally found calm again. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "I didn't expect you to be here," she whispered, smiling. Keanu replied quietly, "You deserve this moment." The room erupted in applause as they hugged long, sincere, and filled with years of unspoken gratitude. Later, backstage, away from cameras, they talked like no time had passed at all. She told him how his letter years ago had helped her more than he could ever imagine. He smiled and said, "You helped me too, more than you know." It wasn't about fame or nostalgia, it was about the hearts recognizing what they had always known. That kindness and connection are stronger than time. That night, the internet lit up again. Photos of their reunion spread everywhere. Fans called it the moment Hollywood needed, but to Keanu and Sandra, it was just her friends finding peace again. And for the first time in years, they promised to stay in touch, not through interviews or public moments, but through real friendship. The same quiet bond that had started decades ago on a moving bus that changed both their lives. The story that never truly ended after that unforgettable award night. Something beautiful happened. Keanu and Sandra began to meet again, not for movies, not for fame, but simply as friends. They would grab coffee when they were in the same city, share stories about life, and talk about how fast the years had gone by. They were both older now, both wiser, and both had learned what truly mattered. Fame, success, and red carpets had lost their shine long ago. What remained was connection, honesty, and peace, the kind they had always shared from the beginning. Sometimes they would sit quietly, saying very little. Keanu would listen as Sandra talked about her children, her quiet days at home, her garden, her love for ordinary things. Sandra, in return, would listen to him talk about motorcycles, his charity work, and how he found meaning in small acts of kindness. Their bond was still effortless, like breathing. One afternoon, while sitting by a lake, Sandra looked at the water and said softly, "It's strange, isn't it? how time goes by, but some people always feel the same. Keanu smiled gently and replied, that's because real connections don't have an expiry date. The world still adored them together. Every photo, every interview, every small moment between them became a reminder of something rare, how the people could care deeply without needing to define it. They had become symbols of grace, of love that transcends romance, a friendship that outlives everything else. Years later, when Sandra stepped away from acting to focus on her family, Keanu was one of the first to call. He told her, you've given so much to the world. Now it's time to give to yourself. She laughed softly and said, you always know the right thing to say. And when Keanu faced his own quiet moments of grief and solitude, Sandra checked in, sending him little notes, silly photos, or messages that simply said, I'm proud of you. No grand words, just presence. That's what they had always been for each other, a safe place to land. Their story was never about romance, it was about respect, timing, and fate. Two souls who met, drifted apart, and found each other again, not because of luck, but because some bonds are meant to survive everything. In the end, when people looked back on their journey from Speed to the lake house and beyond, they saw more than actors. They saw the kind human beings who showed the world that chemistry doesn't end. When the camera stops rolling, it continues in kindness. It continues in friendship. It continues in the quiet understanding between the people who never had to say I love you to prove that they did in their own way. And somewhere out there, maybe sitting by that same lake again, Keanu and Sandra still share that easy silence that says more than any words ever could. Their story doesn't end. It simply lives on in the hearts of everyone who still believes in gentle souls, true connection, and love that never fades.